So my name is Pete Wilson and I work for United Utilities. I'm from Cumbria originally. After I left school, went and worked on a farm down in Oxfordshire before I went to college, agricultural college, a place called Harper Adams. I slowly worked my way back, and I was working in Cheshire on a dairy farm. I kind of had my arm twisted by my now wife, who persuaded, she was living with me but working out of Preston. And she'd had enough of the commute, so she was persuading me to leave my job there and move up to Lancashire. I went to work for a feed company which didn't suit me at all, and ultimately got made redundant from that, which was in many ways was a bit of a blessing for me. Married at that time, I didn't have any kids and no big mortgage. It was quite good. I ended up volunteering for RSPB. Always been interested in birds. You know, it was a positive thing to do whilst looking for a full-time job but working part-time. That led ultimately, I suppose relatively quickly, to a full-time job working here for the RSPB in the Forest of Bowland. The RSPB have had a long-standing partnership with RSPB monitoring birds of prey, going back to the very early 80s, 81, sort of thing. And I worked on this estate in the Forest, UU estate in the Forest of Bowland for just over 10 years, 10.5 years, something like that. Always based in the UU estate office, and then a UU colleague, basically retired. There was a vacancy there, so I applied for it. I've been sat there sort of liking what I've seen in terms of a job, and was ready for a bit of a change and took it, and was obviously successful. I've been working for UU now for about 9-10 years, something like that. But working on the estate for RSPB and UU for getting on for 20 years now, something like that. My role is I'm a catchment partnership officer, which is a quite wide-ranging kind of role, and the title doesn't really cover it much. I think you could probably broadly split it up into sort of two broad areas. So there's the raw water quality, so looking at improving raw water quality. We own this land for drinking water purposes, so if we can improve that, the raw water quality before it hits our treatment works, all the better for us. And the second part of it is biodiversity as well. So I do a lot of work. We're sat in the middle of a triple SI here, Site of Special Scientific Interest, national designation for its biodiversity. But the great thing about those two areas is that there's a great deal of synergy between the two of them. You know, if we can enhance the environment that we're sat in, the catchment land, in terms of biodiversity, it also has knock-on benefits for raw water quality, and in particular in this area, the colour of the water. So if we've got, sometimes you might see after heavy rainfall in the uplands, you can see the water looks very tea-like in terms of colour. That colour, hazen, we call it, it can get really bad, almost like stewed tea, in terms of colour. And obviously we've got to remove that colour from the water, which costs us. And if we can do it in a more natural way by enhancing the catchment land, which is predominantly deep peat areas up here, by restoring them as much as possible, retaining the water in there, filtering it and keeping it as wet as long as possible, then that's great for water colour and water quality. So United Utilities owns an awful lot of land across the northwest, about 57,000 hectares of it. Primarily it's drinking water catchment, and we're actually sat more specifically on our land in the Forest of Bowland, where We've got about 10,000 hectares of catchment land, which supplies water to, well, a number of areas, but on the eastern end of the estate we've got Stocks Reservoir, which is the biggest water body in Lancashire, and Hodder Water Treatment Works there, which supplies a big part of central Lancashire. In the middle of the estate, where we're sat at the minute, the water goes to the Blackburn area, and on the western end of the estate we have an area of land that supplies water to a range of it, potentially a range of sites from sort of southern Lancashire and also central Lancashire as well. The weather's not too great at the minute, so I'm sat in the Land Rover looking at an area of moorland that we own near Dunsop Bridge. And if you go back roughly sort of 15 years ago, we as a company started a project called the Sustainable Catchment Management Programme, and that had multiple objectives. It was quite innovative, a thing of its time really, something that sort of predates things like ecosystem services and natural capital. Though obviously those kind of principles have always been there, but they weren't in common parlance at that time. So the main things that we were trying to do then was actually the first thing we were trying to do is actually enhance the biodiversity and the status of this site of special scientific interest, to get it into a favourable condition. The second thing was looking at sort of wider biodiversity. So not all this estate is designated, so it was trying to enhance biodiversity on those areas as well. And finally, it was also about improving water quality coming from these catchment areas. And so that programme ran from 2005 and 2010, where we, our customers and partners such as Natural England and Forestry Commission invested quite a lot of money in terms of a range of projects. Looking at the areas of deep peat, the blanket bog up here, we did about, I think it was about 35 kilometres of what are known as grips, which are basically artificial drains that were dug during the sort of 50s, 60s, 70s, and perhaps even into the 80s in some locations, mainly looking to try and drain the areas of blanket bog and increase the productive capacity of that land in terms of growing vegetation. Obviously these days that's not seen as actually all that great for these sort of habitats, which require them to be very wet. We reversed that by blocking. We put a dam in roughly every 7 metres on that 35 kilometres of grips to hold the water back and to let it percolate and re-wet the peat. At the same time, we also did things like where we've had particularly bad damaging, and for various reasons. Some of that damage goes back many decades, maybe even 100 years in some cases, where the vegetation on those areas has been removed from whatever reason. You've got extensive areas of bare peat, and we've again worked with partners, including our tenants, on these areas of land to actually try and revegetate them, which has gone really well. I mean, it had been used prior to that as a method in places like the Peak District, but it was quite new to me at that time, and I was a little bit sceptical. But actually, after 2 or 3 years, it was amazing really to see the vegetation coming back onto those areas where peat was just washing off. Because that's the big problem is that you got areas of extensive areas of bare peat. Most people will be aware that peat is very good for growing things in. It's great for germinating things in, and things do grow in it. But the problem is that a combination of the very heavy rainfall washes the peat away. So you might have a seedling that's established in that area of bare peat. Along comes a summer thunderstorm or or persistent heavy rain during the winter, and it just washes that peat away and undermines that seedling, exposes the roots, and then you get the freeze-thaw effect during the winter of further loosening it, and coupled finally with the killer, if you like, in terms of the wind. Eventually that seedling gets so undermined that it's just flopping around there in the wind and it blows away. It's a perpetual cycle, but the methods we use or have been developed actually get over that and speed up the process so that you get a much more extensive recovery of the vegetation. It's a lot more vigorous, and yeah, you get sort of 90–100% plant coverage of those bare areas within sort of 2 or 3 years, which is great. Keeps all that peat in one place. I've talked about some, I don't know, drastic interventions, positive interventions, but quite involved. One of the other things is that I mean all these areas are farmed. We rent them out to farm tenants, and obviously they play a key role in that, and we've worked very closely with them over the last sort of 15–20 years. Also with Natural England and using agri-environment schemes to not across the board, but where necessary, livestock numbers have been reduced by as much as 50%. And all that's having a really positive impact in terms of the vegetation as well. So, I mean, there's the obvious impact of grazing. And you can get localised, or in the past you get localised areas of overgrazing. But now that's, in my experience, pretty much unheard of now. The other effect is, and again, this is pretty localised, is just the action of sheep moving through an area, walking through an area. Can be damaging to things like sphagnum, which is one of the sort of keystone species in the deep peat areas. So yeah, sheep walking backwards and forwards, grazing across those areas, whilst they might not actually eat that much sphagnum, the walking backwards and forwards can have a negative impact on it. And where we are at the minute, I actually kind of surprised myself. I hadn't been up on this area for, I don't know, a year, 18 months, and sometimes your memory can play tricks on you and you think it's a certain way. And I came back and walked across it, and I was very pleasantly surprised by the amount of sphagnum that we've got growing in areas. Still things we can do in terms of enhancing the environment. We've still got some areas of eroding peat hags to the right of me on the other side of the valley. We have areas of where the peat's become exposed on the edges, the peat hags. So on this particular area, a couple of years ago now, we got some funding from Natural England, and we put some money in from UU as well, and I managed the project and got contractors in, and we did some what we call drip edge reprofiling. So what you find is you'll have a steep bank of eroding peat, might be 2 metres high, up to something like that, but you'll get a quite dense area of vegetation overhanging it, where the peat's eroding away underneath it, and basically we're looking to regrade that edge of that peat to a more shallow angle and bring the existing vegetation and cover that area. I remember seeing it for the first time about 10 years ago, and that bit of work, to be totally honest, was quite disappointing. It took 3 or 4 years to actually become established, and even then, I was a bit dubious. There were still areas of bare peat, so I was a little bit sceptical, cautious about using it again. But sort of nothing ventured, nothing gained. But the contractors we got in, who were the same ones who did it 10 years ago, they've improved their technique so much that you come out and look at an area that they've just done, and you can barely tell they've been there. Even some people who are familiar with these sort of areas to go out there, and you can almost have it at your feet and not necessarily realise that what they've done. So you've gone from an area of eroding peat to what looks like vegetated peatland again, which is absolutely brilliant. A lot of this stuff you just can't do on our own. Our farm tenants in that case were really supportive. They were keen to see that happen. I think they were pleasantly surprised by the success of that drip edge reprofiling. Yeah, it's looking really good. really, really good. Coming down the hill, if you like, off the blanket bog areas, something that it had a dual purpose for ultimately for United Utilities. What we were doing was fencing off the main watercourses, basically putting a fence up either side of the river. That fence might be anything from 50 metres to 200 metres away from the river, depending on the site specifics and the terrain. That enabled us to keep livestock away from the drinking water source, the raw water, so further enhancing the water quality, but it also provided a massive opportunity to actually create habitat that's probably a bit lacking in the uplands, planting trees, allowing natural regeneration where you've still got remaining trees in the uplands, so creating what some people would call clough woodland. And we sat here sort of 10 years on, and you can look down in this valley bottom and you can see some of those trees. I mean, some of them are barely clinging on. You know, they were say planted 10 years ago. They were probably about 18 inches tall now. They might only be 2 or 3 foot tall on some areas. In others, that you've got some really good growth on some species, and they might be 20, even 30 foot tall in that time. So you've got a real mix. But this isn't about creating a commercial woodland. We're trying to create something that's a lot more natural. Let's say we're in a site of special scientific interest, so these are broadleaf species, native species, and it would be natural to have a range of states, shall we say, you know, trees that are growing really well on some of the richer soils, the more sheltered areas, other ones that are clinging on for grim death on some of those areas that, you know, these tiny little trees that might be decades, even hundreds of years old, but are actually tiny and just about managed to scrape by. What we were trying to do here was try and address biodiversity issues in the Triple SI and outside the Triple SI. So trying to bring back things that were missing or damaged, and also from a water company perspective, trying to improve our raw product, the stuff that goes into the treatment works in a big way. The other benefits that come out of that, we weren't even thinking about at the time. So we talk about flood management, keeping water on the ground. So I've just mentioned about grip blocking, bare peat restoration, drip edge reprofiling, sphagnum, all things that are aimed at trying to retain water on the land as much as possible for the benefit of the habitats and species, raw water quality, but also in terms of carbon sequestration. Peatlands are massive stores of carbon, and that's primarily through the waterlogging process, the cool climate, and the partial decomposition of that vegetation over millennia to create areas of peat which could be 2, 3, sometimes even 4 metres deep in places. Yeah, so all sorts of sort of knock-on benefits that, as I say, at the time when we first envisaged this project, which wasn't really even, you know, wasn't anywhere near us in terms of our thinking and the possible benefits, but they're all there. The common thread through most of what I'd done is with regard to land management, whether it's agricultural, conservation, and now in my current role with UU, which kind of combines a lot of those aspects, but also obviously looking more specifically at improving the water environment and raw water quality. Oh, I keep banging on about this, but all those things just so neatly join up together and bringing benefits across a range of things. You know, carbon sequestration, we mentioned that, flooding, biodiversity, drinking water quality, and I suppose the wider water quality in the wider catchment as well, ultimately. Land management, the environment, the countryside, it's always been key threads that have, I suppose, running through my career and my interests. We work in a political environment, and probably none more so. And where we sit in time at the minute, you know, in terms of their environment plans, the peat strategy, environmental bill, etc., and all the things that might bring. Yeah, a lot of positives in those proposed ideas, and you know, it's not in stone. We're still sitting here wondering quite what's going to happen, how it's going to happen, and how it's going to be delivered. But I think on balance, I'm quite positive about it. So all these things we discussed, you know, we're a landowner. You know, some people think that gives you carte blanche to do what you like, but I mean, there's a whole raft of things that mean that really you have to work in tandem, in partnership with a whole range of people, individuals, organisations, etc., who may share your objectives, might be subtly different, or might almost, in some cases, be the polar opposite, I guess. Fortunately, the latter is probably fairly rare, but by and large, those kind of partnerships are really good and thriving. They take an awful lot of effort to keep up with. I'm not saying I'm perfect, but yeah, I think there's a lot of positives. There's a lot of people out there who are very interested in this kind of thing from all different stretches. Well, you know, whether it's agricultural, the farming side of it, conservation groups, charities, community groups, goes on and on and on in terms of, you know, got various interests in it. I had an email earlier today from British Mountaineering Council group looking to undertake sort of some upland restoration works in partnership, basically volunteering, which is absolutely brilliant to hear. We started SCAMP in 2005, and I kind of alluded to the fact that it ended in 2010. I mean, the reality is that it's an ongoing process, and recognising that. So yeah, we might, maybe SCAMP provided a focus, and quite an intensive focus to deliver something over 5 years. But there's been substantial work that's happened since then, and will continue to do so. We as a company, as a water company, along with all the other water companies, enter a new asset management plan phase, which begins in April 2020. So every 5 years we have to agree our plans with our regulators, including Ofwat and Natural England, Environment Agency and others. And they give us various tasks to do. And some of those tasks that we've discussed today in terms of biodiversity, water quality, etc., will still be there in this coming 5 years from 2020 to 25. So yeah, there'll be more of the same, which will be a good thing.
Our Talking Rivers series of audio productions has been brought to you by Ribble Rivers Trust as part of the Ribble Life Together project. It celebrates the rich cultural, social and natural heritage of the Ribble Catchment. Creating the series has been made possible by National Lottery players through the Heritage Fund. For more episodes and information, visit ribblelifetogether.org.